We use these structures every day, the Arthur Lang, the Alex Fraser, and the Lionsgate, among others. But how much thought do we really give them and how they came to be? And would we consider them art? These are some of the questions tackled in a new book. Here to talk about Incredible Crossings, the history and art of the bridges, tunnels, and inland ferries that connect British Columbia is author Derek Hayes. Welcome, Derek.
Hello, John. Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate you doing this. I understand this began as something of a COVID project. You were working on a completely different book when the world shut down, of course, in March of 2020 and derailed those plans entirely. What happened there?
Well, I would, yeah, it was a COVID project. Certainly, I was looking for something that I could do without leaving British Columbia, basically. And I had already had a huge collection of bridges, old bridges, and new bridges and stuff because I've always been fascinated. Because as a photographer, I've always been fascinated by the curves and lines and general geometric patterns of bridges. So I've been photographing them for quite a while. So I decided that I could add to that and add the history. And so I took off on a couple of tours around BC, which of course was the only place you could go in 2020 anyway. And lo and behold, ended up as a book.
Now, for most folks, Derek, most of the time, these are very utilitarian structures. Yet you make a very compelling case that there is art, engineering, and indeed history to many of these things. Were you surprised at that, or is that a view you've always held?
No, that's a view I've always held. Certainly, the problem is that today's bridges, the modern bridges that they use, particularly the relatively short ones, they tend to be very monolithic, concrete, flat structures that do the job very well, but they're not very interesting to look at. So one of the reasons I had for doing this was to try and document some of the bridges that are disappearing. Like this wooden truss bridges all over the province, for example, that are quite scenic, shall we say. And so I wanted to try, and I've been doing this for a long time. I always try to, anything that I know is going to change, I try to photograph it so that I've got a record of it. So that's what I was doing here.
So many possibilities that you could have put in the book, bridges, tunnels, ferries, of course, all these structures. How did you come up with the final contenders that actually did make the book?
Well, it's really just the ones that had interesting stories, or at least I thought had interesting stories, and there were turned out to be lots of those. I mean, I figure it's hard to document exactly, but I figure there's about 3,500 bridges in total in the province, both road and rail. So obviously you have to be very, very, very selective. And so if it was interesting to look at and therefore to photograph, and also had an interesting history, then it probably made it into the book, and otherwise it didn't. So it's not just a compendium of 3,500 bridges by any sense.
Now, many of us take this infrastructure for granted, yet when it's suddenly not there, we keenly feel its absence. What do you think something like the atmospheric rivers of 2021 can teach us about this?
Well, I mean, bridges are, they call it critical infrastructure, right? I mean, it's because, and I mean, what happened on the Alex Fraser Bridge the other night is a case in point. You cut off these choke points, they are going to have a very great effect on everybody. So, and of course, the Lower Mainland is just like a lot of BC is got so many rivers and water bodies that need to be crossed one way or the other. So there's lots of bridges, obviously, and the atmospheric river thing that cut all the some of the Coquihalla bridges, was obviously showed that some of these modern bridges are not actually as strong as they supposed to be. But and I actually had to sort of almost rewrite a bit at the end of the book to cover all that, because it was something I hadn't thought I'd have to deal with, shall we say.